Hey folks, and welcome to another video here at MTG with Tio Pablo. I am Uncle Pablo, your favorite uncle who likes you just the way you are and is always down to play Magic with you. And today I want to do a little bit of a public service by giving a little bit of context for the cultures and civilizations that inspired the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Now, this could be a very broad topic, so I'm not going to go in depth. This really is just an overview. But the reason why I'm doing this is because a lot of people tend to conflate or confuse the Maya, Aztec, and Inca cultures. And I just want to make it clear these were not the only cultures from which the Lost Caverns of Ixalan took inspiration, but they are the main ones. So I'm going to just do a quick overview, and hopefully this will give people a better understanding of where this is coming from. I do appreciate you watching this video. I don't often make content in English, although I'm trying to pick that up a little bit more. Just trying to bridge my two communities, my community here in the United States and my community in Latin America. If you like this content, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can also leave me a tip by giving me a super thanks. And if you would like to talk, remember you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or find me on Discord too. You can also do that. I'm always up for talking and playing Magic and discussing things with people. So I'm going to give a brief overview today of just the most basic facts about these civilizations, just where they lived, who they were, what they were about. And then if you want to learn more, I really encourage you to read more. I'm going to do some suggested readings in the descriptions. I really highly recommend that you check out the Ancient America's YouTube channel, which I think is really, really cool. Also, I'm going to link to that in the description of the video. And yeah, if you want to talk about this any further, just hit me up. So the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, as people already know, have drawn their inspiration from ancient American cultures. And under the direction of Guatemalan artist Ovidio Cartagena, it's been just an absolute triumph. There's Wizards of the Coast has described this as love letter to Latin America, and it really does come across that way. You can tell that there's been a lot of love and a lot of passion put into this, a lot of thought as well, and quite a bit of research. And in the hands of all the very talented artists that work on Magic, it's just absolutely mind-blowingly beautiful, and it's full of little Easter eggs if you start looking for them. And that's something that my friends and I have really enjoyed looking at. I've got a lot of friends, obviously in Guatemala, where I'm from, also in Mexico, which is a place where I visit frequently. But across Latin America, I've got friends. We've been looking at the set and really enjoying what it's like. And it's a set, it's something that we've been dreaming of getting for a very long time. We've always wanted to have like a Latin American inspired D&D or MTG set, and now we have it. It's here and we're really happy. Still, the reception has been a little bittersweet, partly because we're still sort of reeling from how it wasn't that long ago that Wizards of the Coast closed down the Latin American office for Wizards and just laid off everyone. And also there's been a little bit of disappointment at the fact that no one from the Latin American creator content community got invited to participate in spoiler season or anything like that. So there's been a little bit of bittersweetness, but overall, people are really happy with this set. It looks fun. It looks exciting. Actually, I think personally, this is my favorite set since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So before I get started, there's something really important that I want to point out, is that there is still a very large Maya population across Mexico, Guatemala, and into Honduras and El Salvador. And there's they're a thriving culture, and the Maya are still, politically active, economically active. Their languages are alive. There was 30 Maya languages spoken between Mexico and Guatemala, and the reason why I highlight this is because there is this common misconception that Maya people kind of mysteriously vanished around the year 900. And this has been the result of a pretty malicious attempt at causing a disconnect between modern day Maya people and ancient Maya people to sort of take away their claim to their cultural heritage and their land. So it's a really ugly colonizing thing that when people who uphold that view, and so let's just make sure that that's not something we're participating in. because 19th century archaeologists, for some reason, concluded that these people were not the same. But when you're culturally, linguistically, and religiously linked to a group of people, it's very likely that they are your ancestors, especially if you live in the same part of the world. The Maya didn't mysteriously disappear. There was a collapse, and many cities were abandoned, but then people simply relocated somewhere else. And those kingdoms, some of them are still standing. Like you still can go to Quiche, or you can still go to Xelajú, or you can still go to several towns in southern Mexico where it's always been a Maya city, and it still is. So let's just not fall into that trap. A really interesting thing to note is that the first Ixalan block drew its inspiration mainly from the early period of the Spanish colonization of America, which started in 1493 with the invasion of the island of Haiti, which was also known as Quisqueya, and this island is now known as it was renamed by the Spanish as Hispaniola, and it is modern day Haiti and Dominican Republic, and the colonization of America went on for until the 1800s, when America finally broke off from Spain. Um, and I think it was a pretty bold move on by Wizards of the Coast to uh, draw inspiration from a period of time that was so violent and turbulent and caused so much loss. And they did a good job of keeping a safe distance from anything too historical, or from going or from making it too violent in the narrative. But still, it is for a lot of people, the colonization of America is still very much an open wound for a lot of people. And you might be thinking, like, well, how can people still be mad about something that happened 500 years ago? Well, here's the thing. The process of the colonization of America never really was totally completed. There were always pockets of resistance. There are still pockets of resistance to this day. And when you consider, like, the level of loss that people have suffered throughout the centuries, I mean, you think about how in the wake of the European invasion of America, about 80% of the American population died to disease. I want to make it clear that that is totally just an accident. Like, viruses don't choose who they target, or bacteria don't choose who they target. But ultimately, that was just apocalyptic for the American people. That was apocalyptic. And the other thing to consider is that during the 15th and 16th centuries, more books were lost and destroyed. More books were burned and lost to history forever than before or since in history. Entire libraries were just burned. Entire histories erased from the world. So the level of loss that the Maya people suffered is really just downright unimaginable to most of us. And the thing is that resistance never stopped, and there's a direct link between the problems that the Maya people face today and what happened back in the 15 and 1600s. Like, if you really study history, you will see that there's an uninterrupted line. The names and the players change. Like, it's no longer the Spanish Empire. But as we talk about Ixalan today, like, Maya people really do need our help and our support and awareness of what's going on, because in Guatemala you've got Maya people just, like, really fighting tooth and nail, leading these leading protests and leading marches and all kinds of things, just trying to protect our very, very frail democracy. We've also got the Ixil people, who themselves in recent history have been victims of a genocide attempt, now trying to fight off all these mining companies, particularly Canadian mining companies, that are basically destroying their land, pushing people out of their homes, and there's been violence around this, and so these people are really struggling to survive. The people in Chiapas in southern Mexico, they had a popular uprising. They got the government to agree to return their lands and give them autonomy. And that was almost maybe more than 30 years ago. I'm not sure on the date, but they're still waiting for the Mexican government to uphold their agreement. So the thing is that the struggle for Maya people continues to this day, and it is very real, and we all need to be aware of it. And it's very cool to think about ancient Maya people, but we must not forget that their descendants are still here, and they're still dealing with the aftermath of having their land taken from them, and from having been oppressed for literal centuries. So right now there's a huge cultural revival, and there's a lot more political participation and all, but there's a lot more work to do, and we should be supporting the Maya population in any way that we can. Now, with that out of the way, let's just lay down some context. So the two main factions that are inspired by Latin American civilizations are the River Heralds, who are mostly inspired by the Maya, and then the Sun Empire, which is largely inspired by the Aztec and Inca civilizations. But there's also like little strokes of other things, like we do see like some Olmec heads somewhere in some art and all this. And if you want to get really the specifics of this, sometime next week, my friend Jessica and I are going to do a breakdown of cards, just talking about specific art in cards that are going to really highlight this a little bit more. So stay tuned, come back next week, and we'll have that video up. Now, where should I begin? Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the Maya, since they are the most ancient of these three civilizations. So the first thing to know about the Maya is that the Maya, they're actually descended from older cultures, but what we can clearly identify as Maya based on agricultural practices and architecture really starts appearing about 4,000 years ago. But they really started flourishing and having these majestic cities with huge, beautiful buildings around the year 750 BC. And these cities, like a thing that we must clarify is that there was never a Maya empire. Anyone who talks to you about a Maya empire is lying, because the Maya were organized in independent city-states. And these, what we call the Maya culture, was basically the inhabitants from the Yucatan Peninsula all the way down to like about where Honduras is, everything in between, a region that we often call Mesoamerica, literally meaning Central America, but Central America is a different political designation. So we will use the term Mesoamerica for the purposes of this video. I also want to make it clear that the term Maya that we use to refer to these people, that was not a term that they used for themselves. In modern times, it has been adopted, and usually what people will do is that they will tell you that they are Maya and then their own particular ethnic group. Like they might tell you that they are Maya Quiche or Maya Ixil, but there was no centralized Maya empire. There were independent city-states very similar to ancient Greece, and some states would be conquered and they would sort of be vassals to other cities, and there was a very complex network with a very hierarchical structure, but there was never a unified empire. There was, however, a lot of commerce between different Maya cities, by sea, by river, and by land. There was a lot of trade. If you think about how far people were trading things, if we think about cacao and how strongly that is associated with Mexico and Central America, well, it turns out that cacao plants actually originated in the Amazon, and they made their way north by trade or migration. We don't know. Corn, which originated in Mexico and Guatemala, was widely cultivated in North America, like far North America, like in the southern Canada, northern United States. So there was a lot of trade going on within Mesoamerica and also out into the wider world. So the ancient Maya cities were really remarkable works of engineering. It's important to note that ancient Maya people had some of the best mathematicians in the world. They were, I don't know if they were the first, but they were amongst the first civilizations to develop the concept of zero. And that may seem pretty trivial to modern people, but if you ask any mathematician how important that was in terms of conceptual development and for the development of mathematics, that was mind-blowing. They were good at geometry, they were good at trigonometry. This is also why they were good architects. They were also excellent astronomers. They were able to not only understand but predict the movement of everything that was visible in the sky to the naked eye. So they were able to predict eclipses and such. And this is something that, modern day scientists do. Like, if you ask a physicist, can you tell me or can you calculate where the moon will be, 17 days from now, or when the next major eclipse is? People do that now, but the fact that these people were able to have a level of mathematics and collecting of data that was sufficient for that really talks to how scholarly these people were. There were also artists, painters, writers, historians, poets, playwrights, and actors, and there's actually a little bit of that literature has survived down to our days. Famously, Rabinalachi is one of the Maya plays that has survived to our days. Like I said before, entire libraries were destroyed, so we don't have a lot left. We also have the Popol Vuh, which is like both a book of records and a book and a religious book, kind of similar to the Old Testament, and in where it's like it keeps track of who's king of what and who's descended from whom, but it also talks about creation myths, religious beliefs and such. And there's been some thoughts that the Popol Vuh is actually like a modern Maya book, because its first recordings are from post-colonial times. But interestingly enough, in northern Guatemala, some frescoes have been found depicting images from passages within the Popol Vuh, which kind of irrefutably proves two things, right? One is that the book is an ancient Maya book, and two, that there is a religious connection between the ancient Maya and the modern Maya. So really cool stuff. Another major achievement of the Maya people was the development of the calendar that they used. And it's they didn't really have one calendar. They had three separate calendars. There was a religious calendar, there was a long count calendar, and then there was like a practical calendar for, harvesting and such. What's interesting is that the Maya calendar system was actually more accurate than the one that we use now. It was more accurate than the Gregorian calendar, which became the standard for Europeans and then the standard for the world, pretty much. So the Maya calendar was much more accurate, but also a lot more complex, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we continue to use the Gregorian calendar, is because it's so simple. So, like I said before, the Maya really thrived between 750 BC up until around the year 900 AD. That's, a really big chunk of time. That's almost, well, not quite 2 millennia, but over 1,500 years. They had this incredible period of growth and development. And during that time, these monumental cities were built. Just absolutely spectacular cities like Tikal and Copan and Palenque. And a thing that's noteworthy is that up until skyscrapers started being built in Chicago and later in New York, these ancient stone temples were actually the tallest buildings in America. So very, very majestic, very impressive. And the cities themselves, they were very big, widespread urban centers surrounded by a lot of fields for cultivation. And they had very sophisticated systems for bringing water into the city, for irrigation, and for the removal of waste. Ancient Maya cities were actually quite clean and quite efficient. And since Maya people didn't really have pack animals, then they didn't have to deal with all this animal waste that happened in other parts of the world. So the cities were not only really impressive, but also really quite functional. War was a really important part of life, as it is for many humans. But I don't want to linger too much on that, because we do have a tendency to over-represent indigenous people as either warriors or mystics. And I don't want to dwell on that. But be aware that war was a thing, and that these power balances between these independent city-states was always in flux, and they did have a sort of very hierarchical way of life. There was a king who was considered a divine being, or king and queen, usually a ruling class. Interestingly enough, the term for like a ruler is ajau, and that term was used both for men and women. So there were also a lot of women in positions of power. So around the year 900, like I said, the Maya had a pretty significant collapse, and the reason is not fully understood. It could have been drought. Some people suspect drought. Some people consider environmental collapse from just over harvesting of natural resources. Some people think it might have been disease. Some people think that it might have been war or political instability. The most likely situation is that it was a combination of all of those things, as it usually happens during periods of struggle. So a lot of the city centers were abandoned. But by the time that Europeans arrived in the 1500s, people had resettled, and there were new cities that were pretty impressive in their own rights. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these cities continue to be urban centers today. Like what is now Guatemala City was a city called Caminaljuyu, and it was just developed around it. And basically, as time went by, like the architecture changed, but it's been a continuous urban center for centuries. So then the question comes of like, when do we draw the line between ancient Maya and modern Maya? And the truth is that there is no clear-cut line, but most historians tend to place the date in 1697, when the last free Maya city was fell. This was the city of Nochpeten in Guatemala, and with that, sort of like the Spanish rule was kind of undisputed, and that's when most people kind of draw the end to the ancient Maya. That's kind of like just a basic overview of who the Maya were, and many Maya are still around, and it is very interesting to get to know their culture, both past and present. So I really recommend doing some reading. I'm going to leave a list of suggested readings in the video descriptions, so feel free to check them out if you've got time. All right, so now let's talk about the Aztecs. So the Aztecs, so let's just, I just, you know what, I just want to make it clear. The term Aztec and the term Maya and the term Inca, none of these people call themselves that. So the term Aztec actually was invented by Alexander von Humboldt in the 19th century, because the people that we call the Aztecs, who were, again, a group of independent city-states who saw each other as foreigners, they had this idea that they were descended from people that came from a mythological place called Aztlan. But there's no historical Aztlan. There was never anyone who said, I am an Aztec. But that is what Alexander von Humboldt decided to call them, and it kind of stuck. But anyway, the Aztecs, the term Aztec usually refers to a group of people that lived in central Mexico, and whose descendants still live in the area. Mostly people who spoke the Nahuatl language, which is massively influential in modern language. Most people don't realize this, but both Maya and Aztec languages have had a big influence in modern day language. Like if you think about like the word chocolatl, it just became the English chocolate. The word avocado, aguacatl, is a Nahuatl word. Chocolatl is Maya, by the way. The word cigar actually comes from the ancient Maya tzicat, which means to smoke. What else? Tomato comes from tomatl, which is Nahuatl. Anyway, there's a lot of linguistic influence that we don't realize, but we do use a lot of Nahuatl words in our daily language. Interestingly enough, tortilla is a Spanish word. It did not come from ancient American cultures. But anyway, I am digressing. We were talking about the Aztecs. So the Aztecs did have an empire. And the empire was born out of a triple alliance between the cities of Tenochtitlan, which is modern-day Mexico City, again, that's a city that never stopped being populated, and it never stopped being a center of power for Nahuatl people. Uh, it still is, you know. So we had Tenochtitlan, which was the city of the Mexica people. We have Texcoco, also still an urban center, and Tlacopan. And Tlacopan had previously been part of a different empire called the Tepenac Empire, but we're not going to get into that. So the Aztecs are a much more modern civilization than the Maya. They thrived in the wake of the Maya collapse. When the Maya were collapsing, the Aztecs were kind of coming into their own. And just the same way, well, not just the same way, but in a similar way that the Greeks had a strong influence over the Romans, the Maya had a very strong influence over the Aztecs. So if you look at the calendar system, the religious symbology, there's a lot of overlap. So the Aztecs had this very heavy influence from Maya, but they were very much their own civilization with their own language. Also, a lot of influence from people from northern Mexico, which is very, very different from the Maya. So the Aztec Empire, as an empire, rather than all these individual city-states, was founded in 1427. And like I said, that was the union of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. And they were a very expansionist military empire. They were going out and taking prisoners, conquering other lands. And a thing that I want to talk about is that whenever people talk about the Aztecs, there's always this, like the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is human sacrifice, right? Just human sacrifice, cutting out hearts and all that stuff. And that very much was a part of the Aztec religion. There was human sacrifice. However, and this is very important, the reports of how much human sacrifice was happening have been greatly exaggerated by, historians and the media, because it's a very shocking thing and it grabs attention and people tend to exaggerate these things, much in the same way that people have greatly exaggerated how many people were killed by the Inquisition, for example. So whenever there's this sort of like religious sacrifice happening, people tend to exaggerate that. So there was a lot less than people think, but it was very much a thing. So the Aztec Empire thrived in central Mexico until 1521, when Tenochtitlan was invaded by the Spaniards, and that is when that was considered to have fallen. Now, life in the Aztec Empire was not easy for peasants. They had to work hard. They were harvesting and all of this stuff, and they could, and there were many things that were disadvantageous, but in some ways they were pretty progressive. Like, for instance, there was a pretty there were they were a lot more accepting of people with different gender identities and expression than most modern societies are. In fact, these people were often given special roles within society, which I think is pretty cool. And also, there was a sort of not quite slavery, but kind of a serfdom system amongst the Aztecs, where if you were in debt, you could sort of sell yourself into service to the person that you owed money to. But it was not slavery the way that it was practiced later in the Americas. It was, you could eventually pay off your debt and buy your freedom back. And also, the children of people who were born into servitude, the children of people who were going through this kind of servitude were free, right? There was no sort of inheriting the social position in that sense. Inheriting social position was very much a thing in Central American and Mexican culture. The cultures were extremely hierarchical, but not to that degree, right? Not to the degree where a person could just be born into serfdom. So a really interesting question to ask is, like, well, if the people that we call the Aztecs were at the height of their power when the Spanish arrived, how is it that they were conquered? And the truth is that the Spanish invasion of America is not as straightforward as most people believe. There were alliances, there were betrayals, there was a lot going on, and very often people from one group would want to join the Spanish against another group, mostly because the most powerful rulers, the people of the Triple Alliance, were very expansionist, and their neighbors did not like them. So they were very eager to rise up against them. So for the sort of coming into power of the Spanish was really not immediate. There were alliances that were made, and then it was sort of like a political and military alliance. What happened was that when people started dying of all these diseases that were introduced into America by the arrival of Europeans, both human to human disease and also zoonotic disease, when people start dropping by like flies, and you got 60, 70, 80% of your population dies, this is the moment when the Spanish really seized the opportunity to really, really take control and really, really take power. And this was true all across the American continent. This happened in North America, this happened in Central America, this happened in South America. So it's really important to note that the story that we've been told, where a handful of soldiers were able to overwhelm entire armies because they had horses and armor and cannons, I mean, it is true. Those were huge military advantages, but no amount of military advantage can really beat the numbers in that sense. You can have 50 people with the best gear in the world fighting against people who are equipped with whatever, but like ultimately numbers are numbers, and this was not as straightforward as most people believe it was. But we're going to do maybe another video on that on another time. If you're interested in that topic, just let me know in the comments and maybe we'll talk about it. Okay, so now let's talk about the Inca. And the first thing to know about the Inca is that they were not called the Inca. They called themselves the Tawantinsuyu, which means the kingdom of four parts. The reason why we call them Inca was because when Europeans arrived there, the ruling dynasty was the Inca family, so they just called it the Inca Empire. This is something very similar to what happened in Zhongguo, which we call China, because when Europeans first arrived there, the Qin dynasty was the ruling dynasty. So maybe, I don't know, did people just name places after the rulers? I don't know. But the thing is that, so the people of Tawantinsuyu, which we call the Inca, they had no relationship with the Maya or the Aztec. The Maya and the Aztec, they had trade, they exchanged, they had cultural exchange, they had, there was a lot of overlap there. But the Inca, completely separate. They never even, they were not even aware of each other's existence. So totally different languages. And again, I want to clarify that the Inca were an empire. They very much were expansionist, and they came to, their central power was in Peru, what we call modern day Peru, but they expanded into Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia, and southern Colombia. This was one of the biggest empires in the world. And a really interesting thing is that they really didn't use currency. Everything was sort of done on the basis of cooperation and the basis of just mutual agreement. And they were able to run this really vast empire just off of that. So there's a very interesting economic system. Just like the Maya and the Aztec, there is this misconception that the Inca were a single homogeneous group. There was a group of centralized people who spoke Quechua, but as their empire grew, it was just a very, very diverse place, right? It was there were people who spoke Quechua, there were people who spoke Aymara, there were people who spoke Puquina, there were people who spoke Mochica, and many other ethnic groups were also part of the Inca Empire. The Inca Empire was able to thrive because they were really, really skilled at the cultivation of potatoes. They had, potatoes originate in Peru, by the way, or the Andes region, really. A lot of people have this idea that potatoes are from Northern Europe or from Northern Asia, but no, potatoes are actually from the Andes region. And these people were very, very skilled at using selective breeding and cross-pollination to create new varieties of potatoes, kind of similar to how the Maya and the Aztec were doing the same thing with corn. And actually, let me backtrack and talk about corn a little bit, because it's one of the biggest technical achievements of the Maya is that they took this wild plant called teosinte, which just makes these tiny little cobs with almost no grains in them. And they were able to, through artificial selection and crossbreeding and cross-pollination, make dozens of varieties of corn. Now, here in the US, I'm just going to say corn in the US really sucks. I'm sorry to say that, but it does. If you go to Mexico or Guatemala, you will find like dozens of varieties of corn, and very flavorful varieties, and that with different uses. It's amazing. And the Incas had a similar situation with potatoes, where they just created over 60 varieties of potatoes, some of which they could be stored long term, some of them that could be stored short term, some of them were big, some of them were more tasty. Anyway, they had a whole thriving economy around the cultivation of potatoes. And they were the first and perhaps the only civilization ever on Earth to be able to eradicate hunger within their domain, because they just were that good at cultivating potatoes. Now, they were very expansionist, and what they would do is they would invade land, and then they would have their own people move in there and start farming and start settling. So they were more like colonizers. The Inca were actually like colonizing and settling and expanding culturally, not only territorially but culturally. And the ruling classes were not nice people. They were not nice people at all. They were extremely wealthy. Like, this is like the wealth of the Inca Empire is something that is just mind-boggling. If you think about how some of their more important cities, their streets were paved with white sand, and the facades of important buildings would actually be covered in gold and silver, so that at sunrise and sunset the cities would literally glow. It was a phenomenal thing. If you're wondering what happened to all that gold, you might have heard the story of the kidnapping of the Atahualpa, who was the king of the Inca. The Spanish took him, and they, of course, their king was very sacred to them, so they offered whatever the Spanish wanted. There was a request to have multiple rooms filled with gold and have that be the ransom. So all that gold and silver was peeled off these buildings, and it became part of that ransom. And of course, then they killed him anyway. They never gave him back. All this gold that was stolen from the Inca was melted into ingots and sent back to Europe. A very interesting thing is that this is just the beginning, right? Because there was a massive extraction of just wealth from America going back to Spain. And that wealth that was, and of course it wasn't just America, it was also Africa and Asia. But that wealth actually kickstarted the rise of capitalism and the rise of industrialization. So it's a very intimate link between the exploitation of resources in America and the development of industry and capitalism in Europe. And it's a very interesting thing to think about how that impacted history later on. Anyway, the Inca, they didn't have a writing system, but they did have a system of recording information through knotwork. I don't exactly know how it works, but I imagine it's something similar to an abacus, where you have different colors and different sizes and different layouts that indicate numbers. But they were actually able to do census and keep tally on what the population of the empire was, vast as it was, using this system. So really, really fascinating. They were also pretty obsessed with maintaining their power within the family. So similar to the way that royal houses in Europe were marrying their relatives, the Inca also did marry their relatives, to the degree that some of them were actually marrying their siblings. This, of course, after a few generations, caused some very serious genetic problems. But anyway, people did not like the ruling class. Again, a lot of people allied with the Spanish to overthrow their rulers, and this was also part of the downfall. So the final resistance of the Inca against the Spanish Empire was defeated in 1527, and that's when the ancient Inca are thought to have not really be the ancient Inca anymore, because they were no longer free from colonial influence. Now, the Inca have a really powerful legacy in terms of they were some of the best metal workers in the world. Their weaving was unparalleled. They were able to make armor that was made of layers of fiber, and eventually a lot of Europeans actually it was a lot lighter and a lot cooler than armor made of metal, and it was almost as good at resisting slashes and arrows because of its tensile properties. So eventually, a lot of Europeans actually gave up their metal armor and started wearing Inca armor. So technologically, they were very cool. They didn't have a writing system, but they did have other systems for recording information, and they really created one of the most powerful empires on Earth. Okay, so that is a basic overview of these cultures. I am not an expert in history, so I do recommend that you look beyond this video and try to educate yourself more on these topics, because as it turns out, the more you know about something, the more you can enjoy it. So just for recommendation, I would say definitely check out the book 1491 by Charles Mann. You might also want to look at the sequel of that book, 1492. I really highly recommend the Ancient Americas YouTube channel, which is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal source of information. And there are other suggested readings that I'm leaving in the comments. So I know that there's a lot of information that I've left out. For instance, I didn't talk about the Maya codexes, all the Maya writings. But that's okay. We can talk about it another time. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. You can even leave me a little tip if you want to give me a super thanks. I would really appreciate that. And if you want to talk, just, find me on Discord, find me on Twitter, find me on Instagram, send me a message. I'm always up for, playing Commander or any other format that I have a deck for through Spell Table, or if you're local to New York City, you can also just meet me at your local LGS. I will take the subway and go to wherever you are to play Magic. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.